At a high-end wedding in Seattle, the last person anyone expected to see was Richard Anderson, a wealthy businessman with a past steeped in heartache. 2 years ago, Elizabeth Carter, the woman he had once promised forever, left him because he couldn't give her the one thing she wanted most: children. Now, she was marrying another man who could provide that family she dreamed of, while Richard had spent his years building a life that was successful but ultimately lonely. But when Richard received her wedding invitation, something stirred within him. He wasn't ready to face her, not with the baggage of rejection and the pain of their past. Yet, his best friend Marcus convinced him that attending would offer closure. "You need to show her you're fine," Marcus urged. "Show her you've moved on." But Richard had a different plan, one that no one could have anticipated. As he struggled with the invitation, fate led him to 2 homeless little girls on a rainy Seattle street. Their names were Lily and Emma, and their bond was as strong as their struggle to survive. In them, Richard saw a chance to not only prove his strength to Elizabeth, but also do something far greater: offer these 2 girls a safe place when no one else would. When Richard showed up at Elizabeth's wedding with the 2 sisters, everyone gasped. Whispers filled the room. But as they entered the lavish celebration, the questions began. Who were these girls? Why was Richard, a man who had long since given up on fatherhood, suddenly playing the role of protector? And what was their connection to the mysterious Blackwood family? What followed was a whirlwind of secrets, deception, and the discovery of a past long buried, one that would change all their lives forever. Richard thought he was simply showing Elizabeth that he was unbothered by her rejection. But in bringing Lily and Emma into his life, he found himself stepping into a role that would make him more than just a man who had been hurt. He was about to become their hero in a story of resilience, family, and a love that didn't need to be written in blood. Welcome to Acts of Kindness Stories. Today, we're diving into a tale of unexpected twists and the beauty of chosen family. Stay with us because what you're about to hear will remind you of what really matters. Richard had spent years building his life after Elizabeth's rejection. Though he had everything anyone could want: wealth, influence, and a respected name in business, he was haunted by the one thing he could never give her: children. At 45, Richard had made peace with the fact that he couldn't father his own children, but when Elizabeth left him, citing that he couldn't provide the family she dreamed of, the wound never fully healed. Now she was marrying someone else, someone who could give her exactly what Richard never could. On the surface, he had it all: a thriving business empire, a penthouse with a sweeping view of the city, and an enviable lifestyle. But as Richard stared at the wedding invitation from Elizabeth, he felt the weight of rejection all over again. Her decision had hurt him deeply, but he couldn't ignore the invitation that had arrived, wrapped in elegance and class. Every word on the paper seemed to mock him, a reminder of everything he had lost. His best friend Marcus urged him to go. "It's closure," Marcus said, trying to convince Richard that showing up to the wedding would prove he had moved on. But Richard wasn't sure. How could he face her? How could he face the woman who once promised to spend forever with him, only to walk away because he couldn't give her a child? Just when Richard thought he couldn't take it anymore, he received a call that would change everything. He had just finished a late business dinner when, walking toward his car, something caught his eye. 2 small figures huddled beneath an awning, their clothes ragged and their bodies soaked in the pouring rain. 2 girls. One older, perhaps 10, the other barely 6 years old. They clung to each other as if their very lives depended on it, and something about them tugged at Richard's heart. Without thinking, Richard crossed the street and approached them. He asked if they were okay. The older girl, wary but composed, replied, "We're fine." Yet Richard could see that they were far from it. The rain was getting heavier, and the streets were darkening with the setting sun. He asked if he could buy them something warm to eat. The older girl hesitated but, after a long pause, agreed. "We'll take food but no charity," she said, her voice steady for someone so young. Over a meal at a nearby diner, Richard learned that their names were Lily and Emma. They were homeless, their parents long gone, and life had been cruel to them. Richard felt an overwhelming sense of compassion for the girls, but more than that, He saw something familiar in them, something that mirrored his own life. He understood what it meant to feel abandoned, to live without the family you dreamed of. Then a wild idea formed in his mind. What if he could help them? What if he could offer them something he had once desperately wanted? A chance at a better life. He asked them to consider coming with him to a wedding he had to attend that weekend. They needed a place to stay, and he needed to prove something to his ex-fiancée. It was madness, but somehow it felt right. The next morning, Lily and Emma showed up at his door with backpacks in hand, ready to take the leap into this strange new life Richard was offering. They were cautious, but they trusted him, perhaps more than they should have. When Richard led them into his penthouse, the girls' eyes widened in disbelief. This was the world of wealth and privilege that had always been out of their reach, and for the first time they were given a chance to live in it. In the days that followed, Richard did everything he could to make them feel at home. The transformation was remarkable. Lily and Emma, once scrappy street children, adapted to the luxury of his penthouse with surprising ease. Lily, despite her hardened exterior, showed a keen eye for fashion and suggested dresses for herself and her sister. Emma, the younger of the two, had a natural grace that seemed far beyond her years. But it wasn't just the clothes or the meals that changed them. They were changing Richard too. The walls he had built around his heart, walls constructed after Elizabeth's rejection, began to crumble. He was discovering something he hadn't known he needed. The joy of having a family, even if it wasn't the family he had once envisioned. For the first time in years, Richard felt a sense of purpose beyond his business and wealth. The day of the wedding arrived. Richard, Lily, and Emma stepped out of the penthouse, each of them transformed. The little girls, dressed in dresses that complemented their bright personalities, looked every bit the part of a family in a fairy tale. But they weren't just there for appearances. They were there to prove something. They weren't charity cases. They weren't victims. They were survivors. They had survived abandonment, rejection, and loss. And now they were about to stand tall in a world that had once turned its back on them. As they arrived at the wedding venue, Richard was filled with nervous energy. This was it. This was his moment to show Elizabeth and everyone else that he had moved on, that he was successful and, yes, happy. But as they made their way to the front of the reception, the whispers began. "Who are those girls?" one guest asked. "Did Richard adopt them?" another whispered. Elizabeth, who had been radiant when she first saw Richard, now appeared confused as she spotted the two little girls. Her smile faltered, and for the first time, Richard saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. It didn't take long for her to approach them. "Richard," she said, her voice cool, "I didn't expect you to bring them." Richard met her gaze steadily. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied smoothly. Lily, sensing an opportunity to speak for herself, stepped forward with grace and poise. "I'm Lily, and this is my sister Emma. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Carter." Her words were sharp and articulate, an unexpected show of sophistication that caught Elizabeth off guard. Emma, ever the innocent one, tugged at Elizabeth's dress and smiled. "Your flowers are pretty," she said, looking up at her with wide eyes. Elizabeth's face shifted from confusion to something more guarded. "How charming," she replied, her tone dripping with insincerity. "But how do you know Richard?" Before Richard could answer, Lily stepped in. "We're his guests," she said simply, her voice unwavering. "We're here for the wedding." It was in that moment that Richard understood something profound. This was more than just a game of appearances. This was a test of strength and character. It was no longer about proving anything to Elizabeth. It was about showing these two girls that they mattered, that they were family. They were no longer invisible. They were not just children to be ignored. They were the future. But as the night wore on, the questions only deepened. Who were these girls really? Why were they here? Why was Richard, a man who had been rejected for not being able to provide a family, suddenly playing the role of father to two children who had no legal ties to him? The answer, of course, was simple. Family wasn't about blood. It wasn't about having the perfect picture of a traditional family. Family was about standing by each other, protecting each other, and loving each other when the world tried to tear you apart. And Richard had found that family in the most unlikely of places. As the night continued, Richard could see the cracks in Elizabeth's perfect facade. She had once wanted him for the life he could provide, but now she saw a different kind of life, one where love and loyalty mattered more than status and wealth. And for the first time in a long time, Richard realized that he was no longer living for her approval. He was living for something more meaningful. He was living for his girls. In that moment, the wedding no longer mattered. What mattered was the family he had chosen. And that was all that mattered to him now. As the court case progressed, Richard, Lily, and Emma stood together, facing the harsh reality of a legal battle. But Richard never faltered. He had become more than just a man standing up for his own pride. He was now fighting for a family that he had come to love with all his heart. The courtroom was tense as Judge Winters reviewed the documents. The accusations against Lily and Emma's grandfather had been substantiated, and it was clear that Richard's commitment to these girls was genuine. His love for them wasn't born from duty or obligation but from the truth that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by those who choose to stand by you in your darkest times. As the judge ruled in Richard's favor, granting him full legal guardianship, Richard felt a weight lift off his shoulders. But this was more than just a legal victory. It was a new beginning for all of them. Richard watched as Emma, once frightened and uncertain, beamed with joy. Lily, still guarded but now showing glimpses of trust, finally allowed herself to hope. The family they had once been denied had now been created, not by circumstance, but by the choice to love and protect one another. In the weeks that followed, the transformation was undeniable. Richard's penthouse became a home filled with laughter, art, and music. Emma's drawings adorned the walls, and the sound of her piano echoed through the rooms. Together, they built a life filled with purpose, warmth, and undeniable love. This story isn't just about Richard and the girls. It's a reminder that kindness can change lives. It shows us that sometimes, the most unexpected relationships can become the most meaningful ones. And when we choose to love beyond what's easy or expected, we create something beautiful. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Let us know what this story means to you and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Acts of Kindness Stories to keep up with more inspiring tales of love, resilience, and the power of kindness. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers and keep spreading positivity one story at a time. Thank you for being part of this incredible journey.